The conference room fell silent as Michael Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk spreading across his face as he spoke in what he thought was perfect Korean to our potential clients from Seoul. 이 여자는 정말 바보예요. 회사에서 다양성을 위해 고용했을 뿐이에요. This woman is really stupid. We only hired her for diversity. I felt my chopsticks freeze halfway to my mouth as his words hit me like a physical blow. 6 years of teaching English. In Seoul, 6 years of building relationships with Korean families, 6 years of calling Korea my second home, and my own boss thought I was just another clueless American who couldn't understand a word he was saying. The Korean executives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Michael and me. Mr. Park, the lead investor, cleared his throat softly, clearly disturbed by what he'd just heard. But Michael was too drunk on his own perceived cleverness to notice. Sarah, Michael continued in English, his voice dripping with false politeness, why don't you get us some more tea? I'm sure our guests would appreciate the personal touch. I stood up slowly, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. 28 years old, MIT graduate, top performer in our analytics department for 3 consecutive years, and he was treating me like a servant in front of clients worth $50 million to our company. Of course, Mr. Harrison, I replied, calmly, though every fiber of my being wanted to respond in fluent Korean and watch his face crumble. Right away. As I walked to the kitchen, I could hear him continuing his commentary in Korean, each word more damaging than the last. 미국 여자들은 정말 기으르고 무능해요. 하지만 회사 정책상 어쩔 수 없이 고용해야 하죠. American women are really lazy and incompetent, but we have to hire them because of company policy. Mr. Park's response was barely audible, but I caught it. 정말 그렇게 생각하세요? Do you really think that way? Michael's laugh echoed through the conference room. 물론이죠. 하지만 그녀는 아무것도 모르니까 걱정할 필요 없어요. Of course. But she doesn't know anything, so no need to worry. Standing in that empty kitchen, surrounded by the hum of corporate machinery, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to a small apartment in Gangnam District, Seoul, 2018. I was 22, fresh out of college, and terrified. My first day teaching English at Hansel Academy, facing a classroom full of eager Korean children who spoke better English than most of my American classmates. Mrs. Kim, the academy director, had been skeptical at first. Sarah, your Korean language skills. They are very important for connecting with parents. Many foreign teachers struggle because they cannot communicate with families. That night, I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. studying Korean grammar, practicing pronunciation, determined to prove myself worthy of the trust these families were placing in me. Within 6 months, I was conducting parent-teacher conferences entirely in Korean. Within a year, I was translating for other foreign teachers who couldn't bridge the cultural gap. 6 years. 6 years of Korean New Year celebrations with the Park family in Busan. 6 years of helping teenage students navigate their college applications while switching seamlessly between Korean and English. 6 years of becoming part of a community that embraced me not despite my foreignness, but because I'd taken the time to truly understand their language and culture. And now, Michael Harrison thought he could reduce me to a diversity hire while making racist jokes in the very language that had become my second soul. I returned to the conference room with the tea, my expression neutral, my movements calculated. The Korean executives thanked me politely in English, but I caught the apologetic looks in their eyes. They knew. They understood exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. Sarah, Michael said as I set down the tea service. Mr. Park was just asking about our quarterly analytics reports. I told him you've been working on them. The pause before working was deliberate, designed to suggest incompetence. In Korean, he added for what he thought was his private audience. 그녀가 만든 보고서는 완전히 엉망이에요. 제가 다시 다 해야 했죠. The reports she made were completely messed up. I had to redo everything myself. This was a lie. My quarterly reports had been praised by the CEO herself just last week. Michael had barely glanced at them before, submitting them under his own name, a fact I had carefully documented with timestamps and email trails. Mr. Park set down his teacup with a soft clink. "Mr. Harrison," he said in accented but clear English, "perhaps we could see these reports? We are very interested in the original work." "Of course," Michael beamed. "Though I should warn you, the initial drafts were quite rough. I had to do significant revisions to make them presentation ready." As he pulled up my reports on his laptop, reports that bore my name in the metadata, reports that contained analysis techniques I'd learned from Korean data scientists during my time in Seoul, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman of color who'd been dismissed, every qualified professional who'd been reduced to a checkbox, every person who'd been underestimated because of how they looked or where they came from. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Michael taking credit for work he'd never touched, while making increasingly offensive comments in Korean about my supposed incompetence. The Korean executives grew quieter and more uncomfortable, their respect for our company clearly diminishing with each word. Finally, as the meeting concluded and business cards were exchanged, Mr. Park approached me while Michael was distracted by a phone call. "Miss Chen," he said quietly in English, his eyes kind but troubled. "It was interesting to meet you today." I handed him my business card with both hands, bowing slightly in the traditional Korean manner. "Jodo manaseo bangawosamida, bag sunsingnim," I replied softly in perfect Korean. "It was nice to meet you too, Mr. Park." His eyes widened in shock, then slowly narrowed with understanding. Without another word, he nodded once, a gesture that spoke volumes about what would happen next. Michael ended his call and rejoined us, completely oblivious to the exchange that had just taken place. "Great meeting, don't you think, Sarah? I believe we really impressed them with our collaborative approach." "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady as steel. "I think they learned exactly what they needed to know about our company culture." That night, I sat in my apartment overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a view that reminded me so much of the Han River at sunset. I opened my laptop and began typing an email that would change everything. But first, I had some research to do. Michael Harrison had made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that being Asian American meant I was somehow less American, less capable, less deserving of respect. What he didn't know was that my 6 years in Korea hadn't just taught me language and culture. They'd taught me patience, strategy, and the art of timing. In Korea, there's a concept called nunchi, the ability to read a room, to understand unspoken dynamics, to know exactly when to act. Michael had no nunchi. He was about to learn what happened when you underestimated someone who'd spent years mastering the subtle art of cross-cultural communication. I pulled up the company directory and found what I was looking for: the email address for our parent company's Seoul office. Our Korean partnership wasn't just about this one deal. It was a $50 million expansion that could make or break our quarterly numbers. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I began to craft the most important email of my career. But I wouldn't send it tonight. Good nunchi meant waiting for the perfect moment. Michael had no idea that his racist jokes had just sealed his fate. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp San Francisco air that usually made me grateful to be back in America. But as I walked through the glass doors of Harrison Tech Solutions, I felt like I was entering enemy territory. Every smile from my colleagues felt hollow. Every good morning seemed to carry an undertone of judgment. Michael was already in his corner office, probably preparing for another day of taking credit for other people's work. Through his glass walls, I could see him on a video call, gesturing animatedly while wearing that same smug expression that had haunted my dreams. "Sarah, Jennifer from HR called out as I passed her desk. Great job on those quarterly reports. The Seoul team sent some very interesting feedback. My blood went cold. Feedback? Oh, yes, Jennifer continued, shuffling through a stack of papers. Apparently, Mr. Park sent a detailed email to corporate about yesterday's meeting. Very thorough. In his observations about our company culture and management style. I forced a smile. I hope it was positive feedback. Jennifer's expression grew serious. Let's just say it raised some questions that the executives want answered. There's going to be a follow-up meeting this afternoon. As I settled into my cubicle, my computer chimed with a new email. The sender made my heart skip a beat. Mr. Park from the Seoul office sent directly to me. Dear Ms. Chen, thank you for yesterday's presentation. We were very impressed with your analytical work and professionalism. However, we have some concerns about the management style and cultural sensitivity demonstrated by Mr. Harrison during our meeting. As you may be aware, our company places great importance on respect and professional conduct. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss these concerns directly with you before proceeding with our partnership. We understand you may have insights that could help us better evaluate the working relationship between our companies. Please let us know your availability for a conference call this week. Respectfully, Mr. Park Jun-ho, Director of International Partnerships, Seoul Technology Solutions. I read the email 3 times, each word sinking in deeper. Mr. Park was giving me an opening, a chance to tell my side of the story. But more than that, he was making it clear that the Seoul deal, the deal that Michael had been bragging about for months as his personal triumph, was now in jeopardy. Sarah! Michael's voice boomed across the office. My office now. Every head in the open workspace turned to watch as I walked the 20-foot gauntlet to his corner office. Through the glass walls, this moment would be witnessed by 30 colleagues who would later become part of the story that would define my career. Close the door, Michael said, not looking up from his computer screen. We need to talk about yesterday's meeting. I closed the door and took the seat across from his imposing desk, the same chair where I'd sat during my initial job interview 3 years ago. Back then, I'd been so grateful for the opportunity, so eager to prove myself in Silicon Valley after my years abroad. Look, Sarah, Michael began, finally making eye contact. I know yesterday was a little intense. These Korean guys, they're tough negotiators. Very traditional, very hierarchical. They expect a certain dynamic in business relationships. I remained silent, letting him dig his own grave with each word. What I'm saying is, they expect to see clear leadership, clear authority. When you jumped in with questions about the analytics methodology, it might have confused them about our chain of command. This was rich. I had asked exactly one question during the entire meeting, about data correlation methods that I had personally developed. Michael had immediately dismissed my input and redirected the conversation. I understand you want to contribute, he continued. But with clients like this, it's important that we present a unified front. One voice, one vision. My voice, my vision. Do you understand what I'm saying? The subtext was crystal clear. Stay quiet, look pretty, and let the men handle business. Of course, Mr. Harrison, I replied evenly. I wouldn't want to confuse anyone about the chain of command. Good. He smiled that patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. I knew you'd understand. Now, about this follow-up meeting this afternoon. I'll handle all the communication with the Seoul team. They specifically requested your presence, but don't worry about preparing anything. I'll do all the talking. They requested my presence specifically? Well, yes. Probably just being polite. You know how these Asian cultures are about courtesy and face-saving. They don't want to make it obvious that they prefer working with senior management. I nodded slowly, watching Michael's confidence grow with each passing second. He had no idea that his casual racism was being documented by security cameras, recorded by my phone's voice memo app, and witnessed by half the office through his glass walls. There is one more thing, Michael added, leaning back in his chair. I've been thinking about the promotion opportunities coming up next quarter. The director of analytics position. My heart stopped. I had been working toward that promotion for 2 years. My performance reviews were stellar, my client satisfaction scores were the highest in the department, and I had single-handedly developed 3 new analysis protocols that had saved the company over $2 million. I know you've been interested in that role, Michael continued, but I've decided to recommend Brad Patterson for the position. Brad Patterson, 26 years old, hired 6 months ago, and possessed all the analytical skills of a pocket calculator. But he was Michael's former fraternity brother from UC Berkeley, and more importantly, he looked like Michael, tall, white, and male. Brad brings a certain executive presence that our clients respect, Michael explained. Plus, his background in traditional American business culture makes him a natural fit for international negotiations. The irony was suffocating. Brad Patterson, who thought Seoul was in Japan and once asked if Korean people celebrated Christmas, was somehow more qualified for international business than someone who had lived and worked in Korea for 6 years. I hope you understand this isn't personal, Michael added. It's just business, the best fit for the company's needs. I stood up slowly, my hands remarkably steady despite the tsunami of anger building inside me. I understand completely, Mr. Harrison. It's all about finding the right fit. Exactly. He beamed like a proud teacher whose student had finally grasped a difficult concept. I knew you'd be professional about this. That's why you're such a valuable team member. Valuable enough to steal my work, not valuable enough to promote. Will there be anything else? I asked. Actually, yes. For this afternoon's meeting, I want you to prepare a brief summary of your analytics process. Nothing too technical, just a high-level overview that I can present to the Seoul team. Make sure it's simple enough for them to follow. Simple enough for them to follow. He wanted me to dumb down my own work so he could present it to some of the most sophisticated data scientists in Asia. The Seoul Technology Solutions. Team included PhD statisticians from Seoul National University and CAST, some of the brightest analytical minds I'd ever encountered. Of course, I replied. I'll make sure it's appropriately simplified. As I left his office, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass wall. 3 years ago, that woman had been afraid to speak up, afraid to rock the boat, afraid to be seen as difficult or ungrateful. But that woman had never been called a diversity hire by her boss. That woman had never watched her work being stolen while being told she wasn't qualified for promotion. That woman had never learned nunchi. I returned to my desk and opened a new document. Time to prepare for the afternoon meeting. But not the presentation Michael wanted, the presentation our company needed to hear. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Lisa. Coffee later? You sounded stressed on your voicemail. I typed back, rain check? About to have the most important meeting of my career. Good luck. Remember, you're brilliant, you're qualified, and you don't need anyone's permission to prove it. Lisa had no idea how prophetic her words were about to become. At 2:47 p.m., I received an email that changed everything. The Seoul team wanted to record the afternoon meeting for their company archives. They would be sending a Korean translator to ensure nothing was lost in communication. Michael would be walking into a recorded, translated, fully documented conversation, where every word would be scrutinized by executives in both countries. I opened my laptop and began typing the presentation that would end Michael Harrison's career. The conference room felt different at 3 p.m. The afternoon light, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table, and the air conditioning hummed with an ominous undertone that made every breath feel significant. I arrived 10 minutes early, my laptop bag heavy with 3 years of documented evidence, and my presentation loaded with slides that would either make or break my career. The Korean translator, Ms. Lee, was already seated and testing her equipment with quiet efficiency. She nodded politely as I entered, but I caught something in her eyes. a recognition that suggested she knew more about this meeting than her professional demeanor revealed. Michael swept in exactly at 3, carrying his leather portfolio and wearing his most expensive suit. He'd clearly prepared for what he thought would be a victory lap, another opportunity to charm international clients with his self-proclaimed cultural expertise. "Sarah," he said, barely glancing in my direction, "I've decided to handle the presentation myself. Just sit quietly and take notes." The video conference screen flickered to life, revealing the Seoul Technology Solutions boardroom. Mr. Park was there, along with 3 other executives whose names I recognized from my research: Dr. Kim Sun-hee, their chief technology officer and a former professor at Seoul National University; Mr. Lee Chang-min, their director of international business development; and Ms. Choi Mi-young, their head of strategic partnerships. These weren't just business executives. They were some of the most respected minds in Korean technology, people whose work I had studied and admired during my years in Seoul. "Gentlemen," Michael began with that practiced smile, completely missing the fact that 2 of the 4 executives were women. "Ladies," he added as an obvious afterthought, "thank you for joining us today. I understand you have some questions about our partnership proposal." Mr. Park leaned forward slightly. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, we do have questions. Very specific questions about your company's management practices and cultural sensitivity training." Michael's smile faltered for just a moment. "I'm not sure I understand. Our company has excellent diversity policies and cultural awareness programs." "Perhaps," Dr. Kim interjected in crisp English, "you could tell us about yesterday's meeting from your perspective. We are interested in your observations about your team's performance." This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I opened my laptop and pulled up my presentation, but kept it minimized. First, I needed to let Michael reveal exactly who he was. "Yesterday was a great success," Michael said confidently. "My team performed exactly as expected. We demonstrated clear leadership and presented our analytics capabilities in a professional manner." Ms. Lee, the translator, was taking careful notes despite the fact that everyone was speaking English. I realized she wasn't just translating, she was documenting every word for the record. "Mr. Harrison," Ms. Choi said slowly, "during yesterday's meeting, you made several comments in Korean. Perhaps you could share with us what you said?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Michael's face went pale, then red, then pale again. Well, I was just making friendly conversation. Cultural exchange, you know. Building rapport." "Ah," Mr. Park nodded seriously. "Building rapport. So when you said, and I quote, 이 여자는 정말 바보예요. 회사에서 다양성을 위해 고용했을 뿐이에요. This was your idea of friendly conversation?" Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The Korean phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I watched as comprehension slowly dawned on his face. They understood. They had understood every single word from yesterday's meeting. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding," Michael stammered. "My Korean is very basic. I might have misspoken." Dr. Kim's voice cut through his excuse like a surgical blade. "Your Korean was quite clear, Mr. Harrison. You called Ms. Chen stupid and claimed she was only hired for diversity purposes. You also stated that American women are lazy and incompetent." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see other employees gathering, sensing that something significant was happening. Jennifer from HR had materialized outside the door, her expression grave. "Furthermore," Mr. Lee continued, "you took credit for analytical work that clearly bears Ms. Chen's digital signature and methodological approach. We've reviewed the metadata on your quarterly reports." Michael's world was crumbling in real time, but he wasn't done making it worse. "Look," he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge, "I think there's been a cultural misunderstanding here. In American business culture, we have different ways of discussing team dynamics. Maybe what seemed inappropriate to you is just normal workplace communication in our context." "Wrong answer," Catastrophically wrong answer. Ms. Choi's expression hardened. Mr. Harrison, are you suggesting that racism and sexism are normal workplace communication in American business culture? No, that's not what I meant. Because our company has extensive experience working with American firms, and we have never encountered such behavior from professional organizations. Mr. Park raised his hand slightly, bringing silence to both rooms. Ms. Chen, he said, turning his attention to me for the first time. We would like to hear your perspective on this situation. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward for 3 years. I could stay quiet, let Michael dig himself deeper, and probably escape this meeting with my job intact. Or I could step into the light and risk everything for the chance to tell the truth. I thought about 22-year-old Sarah, teaching her first English class in Seoul, terrified but determined to prove herself worthy of her students' trust. I thought about the Korean families who had welcomed me into their homes, who had taught me that respect was earned through character, not demanded through position. I thought about every woman of color who had ever been told she wasn't qualified, every professional who had watched their work stolen, every person who had been reduced to a checkbox in someone else's diversity calculation. Thank you. Mr. Park, I said, my voice steady as I opened my laptop. I do have some things to share. Michael turned to stare at me, his eyes wide with shock and the beginning of real fear. He'd never considered that his quiet, polite, diversity hire employee might have something to say for herself. First, I continued, pulling up my presentation, I'd like to address Mr. Harrison's comments about my qualifications and the work I've contributed to this company. The screen filled with my credentials, MIT degree in data analytics, 6 years of teaching experience in Seoul, fluency in Korean and Mandarin, 3 published papers in international business journals, and a detailed portfolio of the analytical methods I developed independently. As you can see, I said, clicking to the next slide, my background includes extensive experience in Korean business culture and language. I lived and worked in Seoul from 2018 to 2024, teaching English and developing cross-cultural communication skills. Mr. Park's eyes widened with recognition. Ms. Chen, did you work at Hansel Academy in Gangnam District? Yes, sir. For 3 years. I also taught corporate English classes at Samsung and LG subsidiaries. Remarkable, Dr. Kim murmured. We've heard excellent things about the American teachers at Hansel. They have a reputation for exceptional cultural integration. Michael was staring at me like I'd suddenly sprouted wings. In his mind, I was just the quiet Asian girl who fetched tea and took notes. The possibility that I might have a substantial international background had never occurred to him. Now, I continued, clicking to my next slide, I'd like to address the analytical work that Mr. Harrison has been presenting as his own. The screen filled with timestamps, email metadata, and document revision histories that painted a crystal-clear picture of intellectual theft. Every report Michael had claimed credit for, every breakthrough he'd presented to executives, every innovation he'd used to justify his own promotions, all of it traced back to my work, documented with forensic precision. These reports, I explained calmly, were developed using analytical techniques I learned while working with Korean data science teams. The methodology draws heavily from research published by Seoul National University's Statistics Department, which I studied during my time in Korea. Ms. Choi was taking rapid notes, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. Ms. Chen, are you saying that Mr. Harrison has been systematically taking credit for your work? I'm saying that the evidence speaks for itself, I replied diplomatically. These documents show a clear pattern of work being produced under my digital signature and then presented by Mr. Harrison as his own contribution. Michael finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. Sarah, this is highly inappropriate. This meeting was supposed to be about our partnership proposal, not internal HR matters. Wrong thing to say. Again. Mr. Park's expression turned ice cold. Mr. Harrison, are you suggesting that intellectual property theft and workplace discrimination are merely internal HR matters? Because our company considers these to be fundamental questions of business integrity. I think we should adjourn this meeting immediately, Michael said, reaching for his laptop. This has gotten completely off track. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, I think we should let Ms. Chen finish her presentation. Everyone turned to see our CEO, Rebecca Martinez, standing in the entrance, with Jennifer from HR and two people I didn't recognize but whose expensive suits and serious expressions suggested they were lawyers. Rebecca walked into the room with the quiet authority that had made her one of the most respected leaders in Silicon Valley. Please continue, Sarah. We're all very interested in what you have to say. Michael's face went white as he realized that his attempt to contain the situation had just failed spectacularly. The CEO was here, lawyers were here, and I was just getting started. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a comprehensive analysis of the Seoul partnership proposal, not the simplified version Michael had requested, but a sophisticated strategic assessment that demonstrated deep understanding of Korean business culture and market dynamics. Mr. Park, I said, addressing the Seoul team directly, I'd like to propose a different approach to our partnership, one based on mutual respect, cultural understanding, and genuine collaboration between our teams. As I began outlining my vision for the Seoul partnership, I could see Michael's career dissolving in real time. But more than that, I could see the beginning of something new, a future where my voice would be heard, my work would be respected, and my identity would be an asset rather than an obstacle. The girl who had been afraid to speak Korean in an American boardroom was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that true power came not from hiding who you are, but from having the courage to show the world exactly what you're capable of. The aftermath unfolded with the swift efficiency of a corporate execution. Rebecca Martinez, our CEO, had heard enough. She asked Michael to step outside while the meeting continued. And through the glass walls of the conference room, we could all watch as security escorted him to his office to collect his personal belongings. Ms. Chen, Rebecca said, taking Michael's abandoned seat, I owe you an apology on behalf of this company. But it was Mr. Park's response that truly mattered for my future. Ms. Chen, he said from the video screen, we are very impressed with your presentation and your cultural competency. Would you be interested in leading the Seoul Partnership project yourself? The question hung in the air like a golden opportunity wrapped in vindication. 3 years of being overlooked, underestimated, and actively sabotaged had led to this moment, the chance to prove what I could accomplish when given real authority and respect. I would be honored, I replied, bowing slightly toward the camera in a gesture that demonstrated the cultural fluency Michael had tried to minimize. Dr. Kim smiled for the first time during the entire meeting. Excellent. We believe this partnership will be much more successful with someone who truly understands both cultures involved. As the Seoul team signed off, promising to send formal partnership documents within the week, Rebecca turned to me with an expression that mixed admiration with embarrassment. Sarah, I want you to know that we're not just offering you the Seoul project. We're also promoting you to Director of International Analytics effective immediately. The position comes with a 40% salary increase and your own team. The promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years was suddenly mine, but not in the way I'd ever imagined. Instead of climbing the ladder rung by rung, I'd been catapulted to the top by having the courage to speak my truth. There's one more thing, Rebecca added. We'll be implementing mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all management staff, and we're establishing an anonymous reporting system for discrimination and harassment. We should have had these systems in place already, but sometimes it takes a wake-up call to make us do the right thing. Jennifer from HR had been taking notes throughout the conversation. Sarah will also be conducting a full investigation into Mr. Harrison's management practices. If you're comfortable with it, we'd like you to document everything you experienced during your time under his supervision. I thought about all the other employees who might have suffered under Michael's management. All the talented people who might have been passed over for promotions because they didn't fit his narrow definition of executive presence. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about creating a workplace where everyone could succeed. I'll provide whatever documentation you need, I agreed. And I'd like to speak with anyone else who might have had similar experiences. As the meeting finally concluded and the conference room began to empty, I found myself alone with Rebecca for a moment. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I have to ask, why didn't you report this sooner? We could have addressed this months ago." It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Honestly, I was afraid. I was afraid that speaking up would make me look like a difficult employee, or that people would think I was playing the race card, or that I'd be retaliated against. I thought if I just worked hard enough and proved myself through results, the discrimination would stop. Rebecca nodded sadly. "I understand. And that's exactly the kind of workplace culture we need to change. No one should have to choose between their dignity and their career." As I walked back to my desk, soon to be my new office, I felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. The adrenaline of confronting Michael was wearing off, replaced by the weight of what had just happened. In the span of 2 hours, I'd gone from invisible employee to company director, from silenced victim to empowered leader. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "How did the meeting go?" I typed back, "I'll tell you everything over dinner. But first I need to call my parents," my mother answered on the second ring. "Sarah, how was your day, honey?" "Mom," I said, settling into my cubicle chair for what would probably be the last time. "Remember how you always told me that being Korean American was a superpower, not a weakness?" "Of course, why?" "Today I finally learned how to use it." The next few weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of new responsibilities and international conference calls. The Seoul partnership moved forward faster than anyone had anticipated, largely because I could communicate directly with the Korean team without the cultural barriers that had previously slowed negotiations. Brad Patterson, Michael's fraternity brother who had been slated for my promotion, was quietly transferred to a different department. During our one face-to-face conversation, he admitted that he'd known about Michael's discriminatory behavior, but had been afraid to speak up because it might hurt his own career prospects. "I'm sorry. Sarah," he said, looking genuinely ashamed. "I should have said something. I was a coward." "The important thing is that you recognize it now," I replied. "We can all do better going forward." And we did do better. Within 6 months, our diversity metrics improved dramatically, not because we lowered our standards, but because we finally started recognizing the talent that had been there all along. The Korean partnership became one of the most successful international collaborations in the company's history, generating over $30 million in revenue in the first year alone. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during a company-wide meeting where Rebecca announced our success to the entire staff. "This partnership," she said, "succeeded because we finally learned to value cultural competency and international experience as core business assets." Sarah Chen didn't just speak Korean, she understood how to build bridges between different business cultures. As applause filled the auditorium, I thought about Michael Harrison, who had taken a position with a much smaller firm after being forced to resign. His new company had reached out to me for a reference, and I'd given an honest assessment of his professional capabilities while declining to comment on his character. 6 months later, I received an unexpected email from Michael himself. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve a response to this email, but I wanted to reach out anyway. I've been going to therapy and doing a lot of thinking about my behavior at Harrison Tech. What I did to you was wrong, and it came from a place of insecurity and prejudice that I'm still working to address. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I've learned from this experience. I'm trying to be a better person and a better manager. I heard about your success with the Seoul partnership, and while I have no right to say this, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I hope you continue to thrive. Michael, I read the email 3 times before deciding how to respond. In Korean culture, there's another important concept called jung, a complex emotion that combines affection, compassion, and human connection. Even toward those who have wronged us, jung suggests that we can acknowledge their humanity while still holding them accountable for their actions. Michael, thank you for your email. Acknowledgement is the first step toward growth, and I hope your journey toward becoming a better person continues. Sarah, it wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was simply the recognition that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of examining their own biases and behaviors. Today, as I sit in my corner office overlooking San Francisco Bay, I often think about that scared 22-year-old who first stepped off the plane in Seoul, determined to prove herself worthy of her students' trust. I think about the Korean families who taught me that respect is earned through character, not demanded through position. Most of all, I think about the moment when I finally found my voice. Not by becoming someone different, but by having the courage to be exactly who I had always been. My Korean language skills, which Michael had dismissed as irrelevant, became the foundation of my career success. My cultural competency, which he had seen as a weakness, became my greatest professional strength. My identity as a Korean-American woman, which he had tried to minimize, became the source of my power. The girl who once hid her heritage had become a woman who celebrated it. And in doing so, she had discovered that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is simply proving them wrong. If you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever been made to feel ashamed of who you are, if you've ever been underestimated because of your background or identity, remember this: your differences aren't weaknesses to overcome. They're strengths to embrace. The world needs your perspective. The world needs your voice. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay quiet when others try to silence you. Your story matters. Your truth matters.